Were you surprised?
Not terribly surprised. It's very disappointing because I think a range of people want to have some measure of accountability. But when you actually look at the federal civil rights laws, it's a much harder and higher burden for them to prove these types of charges. They're going to have to essentially show that Darren Wilson intended to violate Mike Brown's civil rights. And there are ways that they can do that by looking at the totality of the evidence, looking at what he said. But I think their view is the evidence just is probably not enough to support that higher burden of proving an intent to do something based on race or to violate his civil rights in that way. It's the challenge.
And what about the ongoing investigation of Ferguson by the Justice Department?
Well, the Department of Justice has two options. One is the criminal route, which it looks like it's not going to happen specifically with respect to Darren Wilson. But they also have other options, which are civil lawsuits against the Ferguson Police Department for pattern and practice of activities that violate civil rights, excessive force and things like that. So that's clearly something that they're intending to move forward. Beyond that, the Brown family also has the ability to file a civil lawsuit, which is not outstanding for the justice that people want, but it certainly is a remedy that could send a very strong financial message.
On this issue of intent, I mean, even if he didn't that morning when he got up say, I want to violate his rights, or even 5 minutes before, once he did that, why is that not sufficient? Well,
there are a range of things in life that happen that it's difficult to prove after the fact. And with this situation, you know, it's not, the proof doesn't require him to say the N-word right as he pulls the trigger. However, and you can look at the facts and the circumstances. So whether Mike Brown's hands were up or not would matter. Whether Mike Brown was running away or running towards would matter. So those are the totality of the circumstances that they can begin to look at. However, I think their take is, based on that information that they have, it's going to be very hard for them to issue an indictment in the federal court that would sustain this type of charge, unfortunately.
And what's been the impact nationwide following Ferguson in terms of attempts by local communities to reform the police abuse situation in their own communities? We just recently, for instance, this week, Governor Cuomo announced new measures during his State of the State address Wednesday. He announced his reforms that could lead to the appointment of special prosecutors in cases where police kill unarmed suspects and a grand jury fails to indict the officer. This is Governor Cuomo.
I will appoint an independent monitor who will review police cases where a civilian dies and no true bill is issued, and the independent monitor can recommend a special prosecutor be appointed. The independent monitor should have access to the grand jury information, which will be protected, but this way the independent monitor can actually make an intelligent recommendation because they'll have all the evidence and they'll have all the facts.
That was Governor Cuomo at his State of the State. Your analysis of his proposals and what's going on in other parts of the country as well.
Well, yeah, the Ferguson situation has everything to do with what's going on in different parts of the country. With respect to that particular proposal, I actually was part of a meeting with Attorney General Schneiderman of New York, who proposed a similar measure in which his office would be appointed to be able to look at these things more independently than local prosecutors who work with police officers would. This, I think, is a step in the right direction. And it really points to the larger issue, and that the protesters are talking about, is that we're talking systemic failure. What's happening in grand juries around the country, and even in terms of the federal prosecution, the system is not keeping up with the current nature and tenor of the civil rights violations that are happening with police departments. We need protesters out there to push that political agenda to make sure that Black Lives Matter, and then we need to have smart reforms like this one that shift the dynamic so that the system is not trying to reform itself.